What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Turnbuckle Topics podcast. I'm your host, Pat Deneen, and tonight is night one of the WWE Draft, taking place on Friday Night Smackdown. We're actually just moments away on Fox, and we got a list of rules I'm going to go over real quick, and some potentials that I could see being drafted tonight, whether it's SmackDown to Raw, Raw to SmackDown, NXT call-ups, potentially debuts or returns, and so on. And we actually have a draft pool for SmackDown that was posted a couple of days ago, as is for Raw, but I'm only going to mention who is eligible for tonight's draft on the main roster. So let's start off here with the rules. On SmackDown, there will be 4 rounds, 16 total picks taking place tonight. Monday on Raw, there will be 6 rounds, 24 total picks. And champions on each brand are protected. So we haven't seen this in the past, and I'm so glad that this is a thing now. You know, Cody, it looks like he'll remain on SmackDown as WWE Champion. Damian Priest and the Judgment Day, likely. I mean, maybe they could split up the Judgment Day, but at least Damian Priest will be on Monday Night Raw as the WWE World Heavyweight Champion, and so on for the women and such, the mid-card champions, the IC, the US, and that's a beautiful thing. You know, I think they should remain on the brand if they're the champion of said brand. And the only championship that they could go to either brand, Raw, SmackDown, hell, maybe even NXT. It says that the women's tag team champions, though, are eligible since there's only one set of tag team titles. The current champions being the Kabuki Warriors in Damage Control on SmackDown, Asuka and Kairi Sane. They could just as easily be moved over to Raw. Could we see Damage Control splitting up? Could they be separate from Dakota Kai and Io Sky? So it's going to be a very interesting draft this year, more than ever, or at least in the recent history of the draft. SmackDown will pick first tonight. Raw will pick first on Monday. It's seemingly whoever has home field advantage. And rosters lock the following Monday, May 6th. So that's what we're looking at. I'm going to get into, as I mentioned, who I potentially see going to Raw and SmackDown. I know NXT is involved, not only just for call-ups. I know Shawn Michaels and company are probably worried that most of their roster is going to be depleted between tonight and Monday, being called up to Raw and SmackDown. So if they're calling up said talent, and some are definitely ready to go, the Braun Breakers already on SmackDown, Carmelo Hayes, Ilya Dragunov, and quite a few women as well. Hopefully they have plans for them. I'm sure they will, but I hope they don't deplete NXT's roster, because NXT has been really enjoyable, especially the past year. It's been better than it has been in recent years. So with that being said, without further ado, I want to mention who is available for tonight's draft pool. We have AJ Styles, Braun Breaker, Seth freaking Rollins, Shayna Baszler, Sheamus, the Tribal Chief, head of the table, or at least he was at one point in time, Roman Reigns, the Bloodline, this new Bloodline, Solo Sikoa, Tama Tonga, Paul Heyman. I'm very curious to see how they're going to divvy that up. In just a moment's time, I'm going to let you know who I think is going where, of course. Alpha Academy, all 4 of them. Andrade, Bianca Belair, Ricochet, Randy Orton, Nia Jax, Mishin, Zoe Stark, the Good Brothers, Gallows and Anderson, Liv Morgan, LA Knight, I believe I mentioned Jey Uso. If I didn't, there you go. Ivar of the Viking Raiders. And that should just about do it. Ashante Adonis and Cedric Alexander, again, if I didn't mention them as well. And last but certainly not least, Isla Dawn and Alba Fire. Very curious to see if they're going to keep them as a tag team, as they've been the past year and a half, from NXT to SmackDown, or if they're going to split them. Now, the way I'm going to approach this is I'm going to first do Monday Night Raw, and following that, I will do Friday Night SmackDown, and I'm going to run through all 4 rounds for each brand and all 4 picks for each round consecutively. Again, I'm going to go through all 16 on Raw, all 16 on SmackDown, instead of going back and forth, being that it's just myself, I'm not with a partner here. And the way I'm doing this also, it's in no particular order. So whether it's round 1, 2, 3, or 4 for either brand, this isn't necessarily how I see it playing out pick for pick. Maybe the first couple for Raw or SmackDown I had in mind who will likely be the top dogs. But as this went on, 2nd round, 3rd round, again, 4th round, I didn't really put much emphasis on who's going to be picked when. More so who is eligible for tonight's draft first and foremost. And then just certainly guessing, as we all are, who is going to be plucked from NXT to Raw to SmackDown, being brought up to the main roster. So let me start off here with Monday Night Raw. I think we're going to see a change that we haven't seen in quite some time, coming from Friday Night SmackDown, whenever he's due to return, likely sometime this summer. Going to go with Roman Reigns, especially Netflix, 6-7 months away. Monday Night Raw is going to Netflix in January, so I do think that Roman Reigns will be a big part of that push over to streaming, and so just looking beyond the whole scope of the pro wrestling itself, I think it makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to see Roman Reigns go to Monday Night Raw, followed by Seth freaking Rollins. I do believe he will stay on Raw, not just because his wife, Becky Lynch, is the new Women's World Champion for Monday Night Raw, and since the champions are staying put, that was, something I certainly had in mind, but I thought regardless they would stay on Raw. So going with Roman and Seth thus far. My third pick for Monday Night Raw is Michin. I think she'll be making her way over from SmackDown. That'll be a great pickup for the women's division. Hopefully we see more of her in a significant capacity. And also, to wrap up my first round for Monday Night Raw, also coming from Friday Night SmackDown, AJ Styles. Of course, AJ Styles, Michin, were all part of the OC with the Good Brothers. AJ left them high and dry, turning heel a few months ago. And so my first round realistically consists of 3 people coming over to Monday Night Raw from SmackDown, with the exception of Seth Rollins, who's been on Raw for quite some time. Now, jumping right into round 2 for Monday Night Raw, I'm going to start off with Monday Night Mello. I think Carmelo Hayes will be brought up from SmackDown without question. We all know it's coming, and I think it would make sense for him to make his way over to Monday Night Raw, certainly. So I'm going with Mello. My second pick for round 2, Liv Morgan. I do believe that Liv Morgan will remain on Monday Night Raw, and I just feel like she has a lot of unfinished business, namely for that WWE Women's World Championship. Or Women's World Championship, the WWE titles on Friday Night SmackDown, of course, held by Bayley. But I think it's going to be very interesting. They'll get around her being champion, whether it's against Becky Lynch, taking it off of her in the near future, maybe SummerSlam, the returning Rhea Ripley. They're going to have a feud. So it's going to be very interesting. Liv Morgan will stay put. I see Randy Orton making his way from Friday Night SmackDown to Monday Night Raw. And to round out round number 2, I see Alba Fire and Isla Dawn staying as a duo. I think it makes a lot of sense for them to remain a tag team because, let's face it, the women need tag teams in their division, and so they'll be making their way from Friday Night SmackDown to Monday Night Raw. Round number 3, much like round number 2, started off with a former NXT champion in Ilya Dragunov. He just lost his title this past Tuesday to Trick Williams. It was a great match, great main event this past Tuesday, and now I think it's time for him to shine. On what better stage than Monday Night Raw? It's a 3-hour show, gives them plenty of time. Very interesting as well to see if Imperium, namely Gunther, remain on Raw. We'll see what happens there. We've seen Gunther, when he was Walter, have some amazing matches against Ilya Dragunov in NXT, NXT UK, and so on. So I'm sure those two will cross paths. Even the rumors of Ilya maybe potentially joining Imperium. Looks like Giovanni Vinci's making his way out after being attacked this past Monday Night on Raw by his tag team partner, Ludwig Kaiser. So, hey, maybe he becomes a third member. Who knows what happens? But either way, I think he makes his way to Raw. Second up for round number 3, I have the EST of WWE, Bianca Belair, making her way from Friday Night SmackDown to Monday Night Raw. Third pick of round 3, I see Ricochet remaining on Raw. Not necessarily because his significant other is seemingly going to remain there as the ring announcer, Samantha Irvin. But I think Ricochet belongs on a show like that again, where I get worried about guys like him because he's great, but on a 2-hour show on SmackDown, less opportunity, right? Get that third hour on Monday Night Raw, and it gives him an opportunity to showcase his skills, whether he's involved in any kind of title capacity or not. So love to see him stay there. And the fourth and final, rounding out round number 3 here, I expect main event Jey Uso to remain on Monday Night Raw. I really do. I could see Jimmy Uso eventually, not to jump the gun here, but I could see Jimmy joining him on Monday Night Raw, being drafted this Monday over there. And so we'll have both the Usos back together, at least on the same brand, and maybe eventually they'll be on the same page. And we'll see what happens with the new bloodline, potentially versus the old bloodline going forward. Based on my picks, we'll have Roman and Jimmy and Jey Uso on Raw. And so it's going to lead to a lot of very interesting television. Now making our way over to the fourth and final round for Monday Night Raw. I'm going to start off with somebody who's been on NXT the past year or so. Has done a fantastic job as well. Baron Corbin has reinvented himself to a point. Most recently, part of the Wolf Dogs tag team with Braun Breaker. They were the NXT tag team champions until recently, I believe till last week or so. And they had a pretty good run, pretty lengthy run. And it definitely elevated him back to, I'm not going to say prominence, but gave him that self-confidence, it seems, and even made the people believe, like, hey, look, Corbin ain't half bad. I know a lot of his gimmicks haven't worked in the past. It seems like whenever he's in NXT, it works out great. Like many years ago, before he was drafted to SmackDown, back in, 2016, the Lone Wolf, Baron Corbin, as he was in NXT for years, and then he initially was on the main roster, Mr. Money in the Bank and all that, former U.S. champion. So, look, he's had, some bright spots. I know it's been a while, but I'm glad that he's, reinvigorated himself. And so I think he'll make his way back to Monday Night Raw for sure. Next up, also somebody who's been on NXT the last couple of years, Blair Davenport. She's very good. You knew her on the indies, Bea Priestley. She was actually an AEW original as well, and then made her way over to NXT UK for a little bit, I believe. Of course, they closed their doors last year and a half ago. Came over to NXT in Orlando, and she's done a great job. Has not been able to secure any gold, unfortunately, but she's been doing a very good job. Now I see Gallows and Anderson, the Good Brothers, making their way over from SmackDown. They've also been showcased on NXT in the last couple of months. I see them going to Monday Night Raw, so that would make all 4 members of the OC at one point in time making their way from SmackDown to Raw. And the fourth and final pick for Friday Night SmackDown's draft for Monday Night Raw, I'm going with Shayna Baszler. I do think she'll stay put on Monday Night Raw. And hopefully the Queen of Spades gets some momentum, at least in singles. I've been saying it for years that Shayna deserves a singles push. I mean, credit Becky Lynch at WrestleMania 36 during the Thunderdome era. She tried to put Shayna Baszler over, suggested that she were to win the Raw Women's Championship, and Vince and company were not about doing that. They wanted to keep the title on Becky. Lo and behold, a few months later, if that, Becky becomes pregnant, which is a beautiful thing. She'll be the first to admit it. And then had to basically trade in her Raw Women's Championship to the new winner of the Women's Money in the Bank briefcase, which was Asuka at the time. So, I love Asuka as well. It's been very well documented. All that being said, though, Shayna Baszler, who was an absolute monster in NXT, 2-time, I believe the first ever 2-time Women's NXT champion over there, and she's yet to do anything on the main roster in singles. No Raw or SmackDown Women's Championship, and we'll see what happens with these new titles. What is she, a 2 or 3-time tag team champion? But 3-time, 2 with Nia and 1 with Ronda. But anyway, long story short, Shayna Baszler, my final pick for the 4th round, and the final pick for Monday Night Raw on tonight's episode of SmackDown, remaining on Raw, and hopefully good things to come. But we'll see. So that just about does it. Again, the champions that are staying put on Raw, as it was documented in the rules: Damian Priest, Becky Lynch, Sami Zayn, R-Truth, and The Miz. All champions on Raw, and they're not going anywhere anytime soon. Starting off Friday Night SmackDown, round 1, the very first pick, I'm going with the Bloodline, seemingly this new Bloodline where the leader, it seems, is Solo Sikoa, Tama Tonga, alongside Paul Heyman. And we'll see what's to come in the coming weeks, coming months. Very curious what's going to take place and transpire here. Again, I have Roman and the Usos pretty much making their way to Raw, so we're going to see what happens with this new Bloodline remaining on SmackDown. Followed by that, I have Andrade making his way over from Raw to SmackDown. Charlotte, of course, whenever she is to return later this year, beginning of next year, I fully intend on seeing her on the same brand as Andrade regardless, and I think she'll end up returning to SmackDown where she left off. My third pick, round 1, Zoe Stark. I was just talking about Shayna Baszler, Zoe Stark. They've been a pretty formidable tag team for the past several months. Unfortunately, we're not able to accomplish any tag team gold in the process. But I think it will be good, refreshing start for both of them to be separate. Hopefully that means some level of significance as far as a push is concerned in any regard. So again, Shayna keeping her on Raw, and Zoe Stark making her way over to Friday Night SmackDown. And I do see LA Knight remaining on SmackDown as well. I was very reluctant with this pick. I did think that, he might need to change his scenery. I think he'd do great on Raw. He'll be great wherever he is, let's be honest. But I just don't see it taking place right now. I think, there's 2 people that are on this SmackDown list, my picks for tonight, that I could see potentially dethroning Logan Paul, possibly as early as SummerSlam this summer for the U.S. Championship. And the first name that comes to mind is LA Knight. So I think he'll stay put, being that the champion in Logan Paul has to stay put on SmackDown. And so that's that. Jumping into round 2 here for SmackDown, I'm starting off with Sheamus. He just returned a couple of weeks ago on Monday Night Raw, and I think it would be refreshing for him to, just kind of start anew, like he got his, welcome return on Monday Night Raw, and we'll see what happens with him and Drew McIntyre, I guess. I mean, that may be reason for him to remain on Raw, because it seems like they may have something coming up here But who's to say Drew can't go to SmackDown? So I'm gonna stick with my guns here. I'm gonna stick with Sheamus on Friday Night SmackDown. Following that, this is going to be an NXT call-up. The former NXT Women's Champion, Lyra Valkyria. Back-to-back Irish picks. Hey, why not? I'm Irish. And so, cheers to that. I think Lyra Valkyria, I know she's going to do phenomenal. She has done amazing work in NXT. If you're not familiar with her, you will be very soon. She dropped her title to Roxanne Perez at Stand and Deliver, WrestleMania weekend. I was there for that. Great match. And I think that Lyra, again, I know she's going to do well and deliver regardless what brand. I have her on SmackDown. Now, I also see Braun Breaker, who was recently introduced to Friday Night SmackDown, signing that contract with Nick Aldis. And I think they're going to keep Braun Breaker there. I think that's the right decision. Again, I mentioned Carmelo Hayes, Ilya Dragunov, both making their way from NXT to Raw, which makes sense. Two of them on there, that's fine. It's a 3-hour show. Keep Braun Breaker on SmackDown. You want to kind of keep some of them separated, of course, let them do their own thing, pave their own path. And so that's how I see that going down. And he's the second person who I could also see, as I just mentioned, dethroning Logan Paul at a SummerSlam for that U.S. title. So either LA Knight or Braun Breaker, future U.S. champion sooner than later. If I had to pick one right now to dethrone Logan Paul first, I would certainly go with LA Knight. Not just because he's been on the roster the last couple of years or because he's much older than Braun Breaker, but I think that's just the right decision to go with LA Knight over Braun Breaker winning that U.S. title first. In the fourth pick and the final pick of the second round, I have Ivar of the Viking Raiders making his way from Monday Night Raw to Friday Night SmackDown. It was just mentioned earlier in the week. Congrats to Eric and his tag team partner, Eric, and wife Sarah Logan, a.k.a. Valhalla. They're expecting their second child this November, so congrats to them. Eric has quite a way to go as far as his recovery is concerned. And again, Valhalla will no longer be escorting Ivar to the ring due to the fact she's pregnant. So, again, Ivar's done great in singles, on Raw, on SmackDown, on NXT. I love the fact Triple H has pushed him and didn't write him off TV just because his tag partner is unavailable, and it's going to be quite a while. So, it's been great seeing Ivar showcased, and we'll see what happens going forward. Now, for the first pick of round number 3, I'm going to go with a tag team here that I think will remain because, we saw vignettes and video packages for them a few months ago, but we've yet to really see them showcased. I believe it was for Monday Night Raw. Unless they were on shows like Main Event and stuff that nobody really watches on Peacock or dark matches, I'm going to go with Cedric Alexander and Ashante the Adonis. They would make a great tag team. I'm sure they already have, or for those that have watched them, whether it was live at a show or tune in, again, a Main Event or whatever. But I'd love to see them showcased in the tag team division. I think it would give both of them purpose and some booking, win, lose, or draw, right? So going with Cedric and Ashante the Adonis. Next up, I have Nia Jax making her way over from Monday Night Raw to Friday Night SmackDown. I think that would be a nice change of pace for her. And even the most critical of critics that are not fans of Nia Jax even have to admit that since her return to WWE a year and a half ago, or however long it's been, has been fantastic. A lot has been said, she's not a safe worker in the ring, and I get it. There's a whole list of evidence and people she's injured in her first run. Namely, Becky comes to mind in 2018. But Nia has had a fantastic return. She's really held her own in any match she's involved in, whether it's a battle royale, in a singles match, a title match, much like the Elimination Chamber that took place in Perth just a few months ago against Rhea Ripley. That was fantastic. So I'm going with Nia Jax to Friday Night SmackDown. And next up here, I have an NXT call-up, Fallon Henley. Again, if you're not familiar with her, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how good she is. Has had a tremendous upside the past, and continues to have a tremendous upside. But the past year and a half, she's really done her thing. She was a valet or a manager, seemingly, for this tag team, Briggs and Jensen. And so when they kind of removed her from that whole sense, she went on and did her thing in singles and in tag team. However, she did not get singles gold, but she's a former NXT Women's Tag Team Champion down there alongside Kiana James last year. They won at Vengeance Day back in February. They had a brief run. And so, yeah, Fallon Henley, I think, definitely has a lot of potential, and she's just getting started. And the fourth pick here for round 3, I'm going with all 4 members of Alpha Academy. I think they remain together. Chad Gable, Otis, Kira Tozawa, Maxine Dupree. I think right now with this recent Chad Gable heel turn, he's not done by a long shot as far as belittling them, as he did this past Monday on Raw, and he's chalking it up to constructive criticism. So regardless, we're going to see them all together for a little bit longer, whether it is Raw still, or I think it's going to be on Friday Night SmackDown. Why not? Again, change of scenery is good for some people, and so we'll see what happens there. Now, for this fourth and final round for Friday Night SmackDown, I kind of just listed off a few randoms, I guess, if you will, and I even left the last spot open. So I'm only going to have 3 picks here. I'm going to leave that last spot for a possible return, maybe another call-up. We'll see what happens, but I'm going to give you really quickly the 3 that I could potentially see making their way to Friday Night SmackDown. Now, 2 of these are from NXT, so NXT call-ups in Joe Gacy and Gigi Dolan. Both very good, both from former factions, right? Joe Gacy was the leader of the Schism with the Dyad for so long, the Grizzled Young Veterans, now doing their thing in TNA. I believe they're making their way over to AEW soon as well. And so Joe Gacy's been out doing his own thing lately. I think he'll do great on the main roster. And same goes for Gigi Dolan, right? A former member of Toxic Attraction with Mandy Rose, JC Jane. And so she's, multi-time women's tag team champion down there. And so I think she'll make a big splash on the main roster as well with those 2 in Gacy and Dolan. Also my 3rd pick and my final pick, because again, I'm leaving that last spot open. I wasn't quite sure, so I'm going to leave it to the imagination. But I'm going to go with the returning Alexa Bliss. She last wrestled during the 2023 Royal Rumble versus Bianca Belair for that Raw Women's Championship. Alexa gave birth to her daughter 5 months ago. I believe it was late November. So possibly we see her or Carmella soon. They both had children around the same time, so I'll take either of those. Alexa Bliss or Carmella, please. I would love to see them return. And that pretty much wraps up and finishes out my picks for both brands, Raw and SmackDown. And again, the champions that are currently on SmackDown that aren't going anywhere as the rules pertained is Cody, of course, him being the WWE Champion, Bayley, Logan Paul, and Grayson Waller and Austin Theory, being that they're the tag team champions over there. And again, the women, however, Asuka and Kairi, as I mentioned earlier in this show, they're eligible to be placed anywhere. Raw or SmackDown, namely. I mean, I don't see them going to NXT. That'd be a little silly. But I think that's what we're looking at. And now, speaking of Grayson Waller, earlier in the day on Friday, he mentioned ahead of tonight's WWE Draft, Netflix executives are said to be disappointed that champions A-Town Down Under, being him and Austin Theory, will be ineligible to make the switch to Monday nights. He says sources say Netflix see the talented and handsome duo as the future of the entertainment industry. And goes on to say this is from the Wrestler Observer newsletter. So that is totally false. Grayson Waller, it's totally something he would do. Not uncharacteristic of him at all. Rather, he's a piece of work. And he also posted a graphic of Monday Night Raw, again, moving to Netflix January 2025. Now, before I wrap up here, I have a few honorable mentions that could very well be drafted tonight for Raw or SmackDown, or even this Monday on Night 2 of the WWE Draft. First off, I want to start with a great tag team that's been displayed many a time in NXT UK, even on NXT the past year and a half, and that is Gallus. If you're unfamiliar with them, you'll see very soon, as I've said about a lot of NXT talent, they'll be making their way over to the main roster. Now, Gallus is comprised of 3 members, Wolfgang and the Coffey brothers. I believe their names are Mark and Joe Coffey. Very good tag team, multi-time tag team champions. And by the way, they were a few of the individuals that helped prepare The Rock for WrestleMania 40 and his return, his first match in well over 11 years or so. His first WrestleMania match, definitely since WrestleMania 29, where he faced John Cena at MetLife Stadium. So Gallus, they do their thing. I mean, if they're legitimate and solidified if they're helping prepare The Rock, the great one, the people's champion, the final boss, call him what you want, for a WrestleMania return. Actually, recently on their social media, I saw a recent picture with the 4 of them by the ring apron, presumed when they were training the last couple of months to prepare, again, The Rock for WrestleMania 40. Now, another name I'd like to see return, Sonya Deville. She's been out for the better part of 9 months since tearing her ACL late July. She's due back any day. It's been reported. And I thought we might see her early in the Rumble this year, but that was being a little too optimistic. That is a short timetable for that kind of injury. So 9 months or so, that's about right for ACL. So hopefully we'll see her soon. And I'm sure this will come soon after the new rosters in May. The rumors of the potential a new semblance of a formation of the Wyatt family via Bo Dallas, Uncle Howdy, alongside possibly Braun Strowman, Eric Rowan, and as I mentioned, not too long ago, possibly Alexa Bliss. And so we'll see what happens there. Throw in Dexter Lumis. I mean, man, we haven't seen him on TV in a year. I think it was last May we last seen Dexter Lumis. I don't know what's up with that. So those are some names I'd like to see, regardless where they go. Again, some honorable mentions, and last but certainly not least, he's ready to take on head-on a singles run, Josh Briggs. If you're familiar with him from the Indies, and even NXT the last couple of years, he was mostly doing the whole tag team thing, Briggs and Jensen, but now he's broke out the last few months, definitely in 2024, into a singles run. Almost had some North American gold going up against Obafemi, and that was not the case, but Josh Briggs is definitely going to make some noise on Raw or SmackDown, and so I like what I see in all these individuals, and would love to see them on Raw or SmackDown any day now. So that pretty much sums up my night one of the WWE Draft taking place on Friday Night SmackDown. Again, 4 rounds for Raw, 4 rounds for SmackDown, 4 picks each round, 16 on each side. And it's presumed that, they'll take tag teams as one selection. Same goes for factions. And very curious to see if they're going to split up the Judgment Day. I think they may do that Monday, but very curious about that as well. So again, folks, thank you for tuning into the Turnbuckle Topics podcast. I'm your host, Pat Deneen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, regardless what platform. And most importantly, enjoy Friday Night SmackDown. I'm very curious to see how I fared with my draft picks to Raw and SmackDown, who's going to make their way from NXT or to NXT as well. That's going to be very interesting to see what happens there, as I mentioned many times throughout this show. But honestly, Triple H has done a fantastic job, and I'm so curious with everything, all aspects of WWE, now that Triple H is in the driver's seat, full-time, full control. He'll be given a full calendar year going forward, no back and forth with Vince and all the other people that have been seemingly getting in his way the last several years. So he's doing his thing. He's doing a great job. No one's perfect, but I like where we're headed. I really do. All right, guys, I'll catch you next time. And as always, thanks again for tuning in to the Turnbuckle Topics podcast.